Hi, this is History with me, Dan. By the 1970s, the city of Hartford, Connecticut had lost a lot of classic old movie theaters. In fact, I even made a video about all of them. One of the most beloved was the massive State Theater. It was once the largest theater in New England, with nearly 4,000 seats, and it also had the region's longest marquee. The State Theater opened on Christmas Day, 1926. It was built by three brothers from New Jersey, Theodore, Martin D., and Samuel E. Harris, who'd built the Capitol Theater in Passaic. Its premiere picture was Summer Bachelors starring Madge Bellamy. That afternoon's program also featured several shorter films and live appearances by Fred Ardath and his 20 Merry Wags, the three Ritz Brothers, the Mansfield Perry Dancers, and performances by the State Theater's own 25-piece orchestra. As the years went by, the theater would continue to show films that were mostly B-movies, mixed with variety acts. But eventually, the State really became legendary as a live venue for the biggest acts in show business in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Band leaders like Duke Ellington, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, Woody Herman, Gene Krupa, Stan Kenton, and many others. There were movie stars from Peter Lorre to Jackie Cooper, and even Tarzan himself, Johnny Weissmuller. There were singers like Anita O'Day, Ella Fitzgerald, Mel Torme, Louis Prima, the Four Ink Spots, Sammy Davis Jr., Tony Bennett, Perry Como, Doris Day, and of course Frank Sinatra. And there were comedians, from Bob Hope and Lewis and Martin to Burns and Allen, the Three Stooges, and just about any other major performer from the era that you can think of. By the 1950s, with the television era underway, some acts began to perform in front of a less crowded theater. But then it was rock and roll that eventually came to rule at the State, with teenage audiences flocking to see Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Bill Haley, and many others. Although sadly, Elvis never appeared at the State Theater. In 1956, the theater was in the news for some incidents of what was called rowdyism, which led to a number of arrests. Theater manager Ted Harris was forced to hire additional security, and faced with a threat that his theater license might be revoked, he even offered to abandon rock and roll shows in favor of what he called nice variety shows. But it wasn't disturbances by teenagers that led to the theater's eventual demise. Instead, the massive wave of Hartford's mid-century redevelopment eventually swept the State Theater away. The last stars to appear were Connie Francis and Brooke Benton on April 30th and May 1st, 1960. The theater soon closed down, and it was demolished in 1962. But going back to its glory days, where was the State Theater located in Hartford? This is a section from the 1917 Sanborn Atlas of Hartford. It shows the area where the theater would be built just about a decade later. This was near the place where Main Street, heading north, just after the intersection with Morgan Street, takes a bend to the northwest. If you had continued directly north, after passing Morgan Street, however, you'd be on Village Street, approaching the fork in the road where Windsor split off from Village. The State Theater was built along Village Street, just where this fork started, partly across from a small park located in the triangle formed by the intersection of Village and Windsor. This photo from 1925, a year before the State Theater was constructed, is a view north up Main Street from the intersection with Talcott Street. In the distance to the left, Main Street makes its bend to the northwest, while on the right, Village Street continues north. This photo was taken 5 years earlier, a little further north. On the right is the triangle where Windsor and Village Street divide, and this is a much later view directly up Windsor Street with the triangle on the right. By this time, the park there had shrunk in size. Right at the intersection was a building dating to the early 20th century, when it was home to Pallotti and Dreda and Company, a private bank. This actually brings us to the origins of the State Theater. The future site of the theater was owned by the estate of Nicola Pallotti, an immigrant from Italy who came to Hartford as a young man in 1871. He eventually saved enough money to begin investing in real estate, steadily increasing his holdings until by the time of his death in 1914, he was one of the largest property owners in Hartford's Old East Side. And, according to the Hartford Courant newspaper at the time, he was known as the wealthiest Italian in the city. Pallotti lived on Village Street, where he also operated a private bank. His son-in-law, Antonio S. Andretta, who had come from Italy to Hartford in 1895 for a visit, and ended up marrying Pallotti's daughter and settling down, was given a position in his father-in-law's bank, which Andretta soon developed in partnership with his brother-in-law, Francis A. Pallotti, into the banking house of Pallotti, Andretta and Company. As I mentioned, the bank had its headquarters at the intersection of Morgan and Village Streets. It also had offices in New Haven, Connecticut, and Naples, Italy. And, as the Courant noted at the time of Andretta's death in 1929, it had become one of the leading Italian banking institutions in the East. Unfortunately, the bank did not survive the onset of the Great Depression. Another well-remembered occupant of the Pallotti Andretta building was D&D Italian Market, which opened in 1932. When redevelopment swept through, D&D Market moved to Franklin Avenue in 1961, and it's now located in Wethersfield. This photo, taken from in front of the building, is a view south, with the triangle between Village and Windsor Streets in the center and Main Street in the distance. On the left is the long marquee for the State Theater. But it wasn't always so long. When the theater first opened in 1926, above the building there was a tall sign that vertically spelled out State, and there was a typical theater marquee over just the front entrance. In 1936, the Harrises, the building's owners, completely renovated and redecorated the theater, giving it the latest equipment and a larger screen. It was also at this time that the marquee was expanded with 4 additional sections that ran south along the storefronts that occupied part of the building. The extension was done to draw in patrons by making the entrance appear closer to Main Street. The renovations also included the installation of air conditioning. Just south of the theater were several older commercial buildings that housed a number of stores over the years. This photo was taken just after the theater next door was torn down. Friedman Rugs on the corner had signs for a removal sale. That's because this building and everything else in the vicinity was about to join the State Theater in being demolished. This aerial view was taken after the area had been cleared. The traces of Windsor Street and Village Street were still visible from above. The State Theater and everything around it had been cleared. This photo was taken slightly later. It is a view northward up the new Windsor Street. Village Street had been eliminated. Over 60 years later, Duncan Baseball Park would be erected on the west side of Windsor. South of there was a large parking lot where the new apartment building called the Pennant stands today. I've also made videos about what used to be here before the baseball park and the apartment building. Just east of that, on the far right of this photo, construction was underway on the Holiday Inn that is now the Millennium Apartments. That building is just to the east of where the State Theater once stood. In fact, the stage of the State was about where the pool is at the rear of the former hotel. Let's go back to an earlier aerial view taken before the Village Street demolitions, when I-84 was just being built through the city. Zooming in, the view shows the massive size of the State Theater. Just east of it, on Market Street, was Ados Israel Synagogue, which was also torn down during the redevelopment. Fans sometimes took photos with celebrities appearing at the State Theater behind the building, with Market Street and the synagogue appearing in the background, like this 1942 photo of Henry Height, who was promoted as the world's tallest man. The State Theater was a stage for some of the greatest names in American popular culture for an amazing period of almost 3.5 decades. In that short time period, popular culture went from the age of vaudeville and silent pictures, through the swing era of the big bands, all the way to the dramatic beginnings of rock and roll. Now it is just a memory. Perhaps, if they watch this video, the residents of the apartments that stand in the area today might sometimes have dreams of the cavalcade of stars who once performed so close to where they lay their heads each night. If you have memories of the State Theater, please share them in the comments below, and remember to hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.